Hello, everyone, and welcome to the SAG-AFTRA podcast. I'm Duncan Crabtree-Ireland, SAG-AFTRA National Executive Director and Chief Negotiator. As you know, finding the right representation can often be essential in propelling your career forward. But the challenge many performers face is how to identify and connect with an agent who will truly champion their unique talents. To help us get an inside perspective on the agent-client relationship, as well as offer useful tips and industry insights, I am thrilled to be joined by Daisy Wu. Daisy is a senior partner in the talent department at the Gersh Agency, where she's been representing actors since 2009. She brings a unique perspective to her position, having begun her career as an attorney before transitioning to talent representation, yay attorneys, at such agencies as Endeavor, ICM, and now the Gersh Agency, where she represents renowned actors such as John Goodman, Téa Leoni, and Stephen Root, to name just a few. Daisy, welcome to the SAG-AFTRA podcast.
Thank you for having me. It's my pleasure to be here.
Well, we're really glad to have you here. And as a milestone note, it is one of our first in-person podcast recordings that we've done since the pandemic, because people just love recording podcasts remotely. So I'm excited to be sitting here in the same room with you. This is so cool.
Yes, it's such a treat.
So let me start out by just asking you a little bit about your background. Obviously, I shared a little bit of your bio, but how did you become an agent? And speaking as a former lawyer myself, lawyer transitions to NED and negotiator, tell me about the transition from being a lawyer to being an agent.
I wish I could say that there had been a big master plan from the time, I was a child, but that wasn't the case at all. So I grew up in Virginia, and I was the child of immigrants, and I watched a lot of film and television and always was quite enamored with the business. But, this is in the 80s and 90s, did not really fully understand that this could be a career. So after college, I went to law school. And in law school, and I don't know if this was the case with you at all, I quickly discovered I did not want to be a lawyer, but it was just easier to finish. So I got my law degree. And then kind of in the back of my mind, thinking that perhaps I wanted to be in entertainment, I took a law firm position out here in LA.
By the way, that was not what happened to me. I loved being a lawyer. I loved law school, and I was a lawyer for most of my career up until this job.
Gosh,
so
you're one of those unicorns who just loved the law.
I don't know.
Yeah?
It's so weird, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I came out here. I was a lawyer. I basically lasted a year, gave notice, and then tried to find a job in the business. But again, didn't quite understand how to do this. It was pre-internet. I'm dating myself. And it took me about 10 months to find an entry-level position. And thankfully, it was a talent agency. But I was applying to be a PA. I was applying to anything. So I like to joke that very easily I could have been a great line producer as well. And it could have taken that path.
And you could have come to work here, because you know what? Actually, we have a ton of lawyers who come to work for SAG-AFTRA and back in those days for SAG, who exactly felt that way. Like they didn't want to practice law in like a firm environment, but they felt they could use their legal training in a different way. And so, it totally resonates, even though that wasn't my experience.
Yeah, and I knew specifically that I didn't want to be a lawyer, so I didn't apply for legal positions. So I ended up getting an assistant position at a talent agency for a talent agent. And that was actually the right fit for me because, from the time I was a child, I loved actors. I loved watching and consuming, but again, didn't quite make the connection that this could be a career.
That's so cool. So that was like your version of starting in the mailroom in a way, because that's like the traditional Hollywood story for agents, right? Is you start in the mailroom and then work your way up, right?
And you do. And I remember I'd been a practicing lawyer, but I had to answer phones. I had to make lunch. I had to deliver scripts. So this is, and I think it's it gives me a lot of, I think, empathy for actors who come out here and have to start from scratch and don't quite know how to do it either. And you have to figure it out.
That's a great point, because I think that empathy, it's probably an important part of being an agent, because a lot of people outside of the business or even in the business don't really understand how hard it is to be a professional performer, and especially an actor, because of the fact that so much of your career is spent chasing jobs as opposed to doing them in some cases. And so, I think having that empathy and really understanding how hard that is probably a really good place to start as an agent, as well as, if you're a performer. I do have to ask, so did you decide to keep your law your legal license active all this time, or did you let it go inactive?
The first couple of years, I kept up kind of the continuing legal education, but then it was so clear that I was never going to be a lawyer again, so I've let it lapse, which I'm a little regretful over. That I probably should have maintained it, but I'm not an active bar member anymore.
I totally get it, because my MCLE is due the end of this month, and I just got a little bit more I got to finish up. Right. So I hear you. So let's talk a little bit more about what a talent agent does, because there are a lot of our members who know they want an agent, know that or believe that having an agent's representation could really push their career to the next level or help them get established, but maybe not exactly sure what the role of an agent is, and also how an agent might differ from having a manager.
I think at a very basic, simple level, the job of an agent is to help someone find opportunities and jobs. But then if you step back, it's also about providing career advice, helping guide decisions, really helping you realize your dreams and your path forward in this business. There is a lot of overlap with managers, and I think this is a question that actually comes up quite a bit because there is overlap. So I think from a very technical sense, managers aren't legally not allowed to negotiate deals. I think that's a very blurred gray area. And so many managers are actually former agents. So you see a lot of managers sort of operating in the same lane, but it's all about value add and people working together to help create greater opportunity.
So I would imagine a lot of your clients have a manager and have you. And so you are together part of the team that helps sort of plan out their career and find them those opportunities. And then, in particular, as an agent, your expertise is in making those deals, I would imagine.
Yes. And also, look, I think between agents and managers, each person has their own set of relationships, own perspective, own opinion. And what I like about a team, and that's both with a team that has several agents as well as maybe even several managers as well, smart people can disagree. So I can't count how many times where we'll all read a piece of material, we'll watch a show, we'll see a movie, and everyone has a different perspective on whether this is a good opportunity for the client. And I think that's really valuable because, ultimately you want a client to make an informed decision. And having different perspectives from smart, reasonable people who can all kind of voice why the pros and cons of any particular job, I think is valuable. So
let me ask you then about the flip side of that, which is misconceptions, because I'm sure you yourself and probably through your relationships with other agents have dealt with many times where maybe clients or other people have misconceptions about what the role of an agent, a talent agent is. Any insight you can share in that area?
I think there are a couple. First and foremost, I think so many people perceive an agent to be very adversarial. That's the posture, that there's a lot of wheeling and dealing and it's just people on the phone all day long. And I also blame Entourage for that a bit. I mean, look, we all grew up watching it. It's a great show, makes for good TV. Not necessarily the most accurate reflection of how we work as agents, I think.
So you do not spend your day like Ari Gold, just screaming at people in the phone?
Browbeating people. And, because I think what we do on our side is actually quite nuanced and thoughtful and strategic, and it should be. And I think the way that I like to frame it is we help buyers solve a problem. And their problem is who is the best actor to cast in a particular role. And what can we do as partners to them rather than being adversarial and trying to shove someone down someone else's throat? How can we showcase someone to lead them to the conclusion that our actor is the best solution for their problem? And then ultimately allow them to think it was their idea, because that's the best way to go about it, right? We never get the proper credit. It's okay. Ultimately, the end goal is to get the client the job. But I think that it's a much more measured process and discussion than perhaps what people have seen on television in movies, things like that.
It's funny you say that about agents not really getting the proper credit. I was just thinking to myself, is there an agents awards? And if there's not, it must be like one of the only major groups in the Hollywood ecosystem that doesn't have a set of awards for them.
Well, because it's the same thing. Everyone takes credit for, I think, the work that we do behind the scenes, which again is fine. I mean, ultimately, if you're in this for the credit, you should not be an agent. But I will say that there was when the casting directors managed to mobilize and get an Academy Award category, there was some talk. I would hear it from peers and other colleagues like, oh, should we make a movement to maybe have some kind of recognition too? And my thought is like, why? Again, there's a reason that we are behind the scenes. We are, as I like to say, we are creative adjacent. We are kind of part of the creative process, but in a different way and on the business side. So.
Gotcha. So a lot of our members, and because I've talked to so many of them over the years that I've been here, find the biggest challenge to be at the early stage of their career, figuring out how to know when it's time to get an agent, and when they think it is time, how to actually go about finding an agent, especially if they don't really have an established body of work or a lot of credits to tout or a super great reel to use to help showcase that. So do you have any advice or guidance that you might share with folks about how to connect with an agent and when the right time is to start that process?
Look, it's a real chicken and egg problem, because the old adage is when you book something interesting, then of course you will find an agent, or an agent will come looking for you. But how do you book that interesting project without the help of representation? So I acknowledge that. I will say for myself, finding clients is typically about a referral from a trusted source, right? And that could be a casting director, that could be a filmmaker, producer, studio exec. It could be other reps, like a manager or a publicist or a lawyer. I mean, I've even gotten referrals from an acting coach, from a dialect coach. So I think the best time for an agent is when you can provide the proper tools for an agent and they can pitch and sell and discuss you. So it's harder to do when someone doesn't have the credits. I will say the exception is when there's a reputable drama school, and especially, and I think in particular New York, in that market, there's an appreciation for people who are well-trained and who went to drama school. So even if there isn't any kind of discernible body of work, they know that if someone went to Yale, they went to Juilliard, they went to Rutgers, whatever that may be, there's at least a stamp of like, this person has gone through proper training. I think that is the exception. It's hard because I think it can be anything from a few episodes of a good TV series. It could be a great short that goes viral. I always tell people, especially early on in their career, if you do interesting work, someone eventually will find you. Don't worry. When you book something and then all of a sudden agents, managers, publicists come calling, they will find you rather than the other way around. I know that's not a satisfying response for people who are sort of really trying to find their way and find the representation. But I would say, look, focus on the work, be in class. Maybe it is a short film, maybe it is audition. I know that there are certain projects where you can submit yourself. You just have to continue doing that. And then I think part also of what being an actor is understanding and recognize it's just a long process. And you have to, without sounding too trite, you have to enjoy the journey and not just fixate on the ultimate goal, which is, of course, to get the great job. But if you don't enjoy the journey and if you're not able to weather that, it is going to be a hard road.
Yeah, those overnight successes that have been in the trenches for a decade to have an overnight success, right?
Yeah.
I mean, yeah. And, a lot of people have thought about creating their own content as a way of showcasing their talent. And I think, as technology has advanced, that's become more and more practical for more and more people. Do you see that as an avenue for people who are having trouble finding that role that they think really showcases their uniqueness?
Absolutely. I think, look, especially from when I started, let's say 25 years ago, there are platforms, there are outlets where you can create your own content and be entrepreneurial, whether it's a short, it's a TikTok video, it is, a little web skit that you created yourself. And certainly I think that is a path that can run parallel to booking a job in more traditional ways. Because, look, we have all the agencies now have digital divisions where all they do is scour online to find these content creators who have a special voice on Instagram, on TikTok, on whatever that is. And that is one path. I do think that I don't think that is at the expense of a more traditional being in class, going out for projects, working with up and coming, someone who just graduated from film school, someone who has to do their student film. Like sometimes those could be great opportunities as well. So
Yeah, I'll put in a plug right there for SAG-AFTRA student film agreement opportunities, because SAG-AFTRA members can absolutely work in those projects, and that can be a chance to connect and network, as well as a chance to showcase your talent. And I think probably some great things have come out of people participating in those types of projects for sure. Alongside the, creator and influencer world, which, we just announced our influencer agreement about 3.5 years ago, which is mostly for branded content, but we're looking to, broaden and be more inclusive to even non-branded creative type content that's in these new platforms. And I think the reality is the platform that you're distributing your content on is really less relevant than the talent that you bring and the creativity that you bring to what you're putting out there in any platform. I mean, what do you agree with that? Or
I totally agree. I am constantly amazed. Someone will forward me something, and truthfully, it's a lot of times it's the other agents who are younger and who are more on top of this than I am. And I am amazed by what people have been able to create with no budget, just through sheer creativity and an ability to have a kind of a singular voice in terms of what they're trying to do, right? I think the issue then becomes, because this is an opportunity open to pretty much anyone, how do you make something distinctive that is authentic to you, that can kind of pierce through the noise of all of the content out there? Which, look, that's a journey in and of itself. So I think at this time too, it's being an actor is such a tough business, because traditionally, let's say even like when I started however many years ago, you were really just waiting around, waiting for your agent to call you, waiting for a callback, waiting for some kind of audition. And that is incredibly isolating and frustrating, where you feel like your fate and your career is not in your own hands. So to the extent that our business has shifted and opened up these new avenues where someone can go, okay, well, you know what? I'm not getting the type of role that I want to play, or I want to see myself. Let me see if I can write something. Let me see if my buddy can bring over a camera and shoot something, and let's just put it on YouTube and see what happens. Or let's create a TikTok account. I mean, it's pretty amazing when you think about that. So
it really is. And, this is a side note, because it's not really anything to do with agents. But, when I think about that special sort of creative spark that shows up in all of these different platforms, it's one of the things that gives me some encouragement when we talk about AI. Because as in some ways frightening as the capabilities of these AI tools are, one of the things you don't really see is AI tools replicating that creative spark. And when you see things, whether it's on TikTok or Instagram or YouTube, or whether you see it as a short film or feature film or on television, when you see something that's special and it's not something that's been algorithmically generated. So that's, to me, encouraging in terms of the long-term future of human creativity. But back to our main point. So let's say that you have an agent now. So you've navigated this earlier stage of your career, perhaps, and you have an agent. As an agent, what's your guidance for people on how they should sort of interact with, how should actors work with their agents to help maintain and foster a good relationship and to sort of make the most of that connection?
I think it's all about communication and dialogue, and being very clear what you're looking to get from this relationship. I think it's also being honest about what works for you as an actor. So, for example, are you the type of actor who wants to hear about every project that you were discussed for, submitted, for what the feedback was, why you aren't in the mix on something? Or are you the type of actor who really only wants to hear about something if there's an action step, if it's an offer, if there's a meeting, if there's an actual reading? Because there are different levels of communication, and they work differently for different actors. It can be, and we all acknowledge, it can be very demoralizing as an actor to talk to your rep and hear, hey, these are the 20 projects that you should be aware of, but you're not going to get. Right? That rejection is very, very personal, right? But I also understand the plight of an actor who is literally sitting at home in a vacuum. And if you're not hearing from your agent, what's going on? Am I ever going to work again? Do I even know what's going out there? So sometimes it's a balance, but it's also, I think, incumbent upon the particular actor to know who they are and where they land on that spectrum. What works for you? What is going to be productive? Do you want to have a biweekly call? Even if there isn't something specifically to talk about and it's just a check-in, or will that be annoying to you, right? So I think you have to be not only honest with yourself, I think you have to be honest with your agent as to what your expectations are and what you would like this to look like and what would work for you.
Yeah, I wonder I imagine that sometimes actors are feel a little inhibited from really communicating what they would like to see from their agent because they, frankly, having an agent relationship is so important to most actors that I imagine they worry about alienating their agent or feeling like they're asking for too much or knowing where that line is between sort of advocating for themselves and saying what they really hope for out of that relationship and maybe turning their agent off, knowing that their agent is such a crucial pipeline to opportunities in their career.
And I understand that, right? I think it is valid to reach out to your agent and kind of just ask for an update, or if you hear about particular projects and you think you might be right for them, kind of inquire if there might be an opportunity for you to be part of it, or if this project has come up before. I will say from an agent perspective, it is tough to have that conversation 3-4 times a week when it's the same conversation, right? But I also think every couple of weeks, it's valid for someone to touch base and say, hey, just wanted to check in and kind of get your thoughts and what could I be doing differently on my end? What are you seeing? Do you have any feedback for me that you think is constructive? I would much rather a client call me, reach out and say, hey, I have an issue with this, or I don't love how this went down, rather than to stew in resentment and let that build and where it emerges at a later point and it's much greater than it needs to be, where a quick conversation could have resolved that. I do understand that sometimes actors don't want to be perceived as bothersome or that they're constantly checking in. So look, it also speaks to the particular relationship you have with your agent. I know some actors and agents don't talk as much, or maybe they're more texting, email, whatever that may be. Some like to talk all the time. Part of it is finding that right balance with the person and feeling both sides feeling good about it.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And it sort of makes me wonder when people are in acting classes or whether they go to acting school. I mean, you mentioned some really extraordinary acting schools before. I don't think there's as much or maybe any really education about the business side of what it means to be a performer. And maybe that's because obviously so much work has to be put in to perfect your craft and to develop those skills. But whether our actors like it or not, the truth is that there's some element of business skill that you have to have if you're going to be able to navigate this industry, unless you're lucky enough to have a spouse or someone who will just do all of that for you. So I sort of wonder, what would you think are maybe the key, most important points that people need to know about from a business perspective, in addition to, focusing on their craft?
There's a couple things, and thank you for that question, because I think it touches on a number of different topics. I find that people who are coming out of drama school at times, as you said, there's so much emphasis on the craft, the actual performance. But do they talk about what it's like to be on a Zoom audition and how do you function with that? Where do you look? How do you work with a reader that's terrible? What happens when you don't have the proper amount of time to prepare the way that you ideally would? Because, yes, I know there's a 48-hour rule for self-tapes and auditions, but
yes,
sometimes these things happen, right? So I hope that schools are providing a more practical application and perspective on these things, because there is a business aspect of getting a job. We always like to joke that auditioning involves a separate set of skills than actually being an actor. Some actors know how to create a self-tape that is interesting. They know how to kind of make interesting choices within the first minute that are compelling and that are different, but still true to the actual script and sides. That is a skill. That's almost a skill that runs parallel and is connected, but is somewhat separate than what your acting talent entails. So, I hope that there's more of an emphasis on that, because those are the methods and those are the tools through which you actually get work. I think as a second point, on the business side of it, I think it's important, as you said, to recognize, for as much as that we are all in this because we love the creative aspect of it, there is a business, right? At an agency, at any management company, publicist company, it is a business where there is a revenue conversation, where there is a bottom line conversation. And certainly that's not the main driving focus, but that to ignore that is naive. So I think also as an actor, you have to think about, especially I think when you kind of referencing back the actor and agent relationship, how am I performing? Am I communicating in the right way? Does it still make sense if I, try to think about it from the agent's perspective? If the agent has a bottom line they have to also address, they have bosses that they have to answer to in terms of where their clients are performing and generating revenue. But that is, again, I'm not saying that should drive the relationship, but that is something that should occur to someone over the course of their relationship. If you haven't worked in years and you have brought in no money, then people should not be shocked when some harder conversations need to happen down the road.
Right, because agencies are businesses,
Yes.
and agents have to make a living also. And right, it makes sense, as tough as it can be, I imagine, for people to feel that for themselves, especially if they are really hustling to try and get work and just haven't been successful
Right.
for some period of time.
Well, and then I think the flip side of that too is I think it weighs on us as agents as well, that we understand that actors, for as much as they wanted the love of the craft and the business, they also have to make a living. They have to feed and provide for their families. They have to be able to pay their rent. So even in the midst of trying to find great jobs, sometimes people need to work just so that they can earn a living. And we understand and acknowledge that, and that's just part of the conversation. Oftentimes I'll have tough conversations with clients and go, look, this is not the ideal of what you're looking for, but here's what purpose it can serve. It goes quickly, it pays this amount, and it takes some of the financial stress off of you. Because being financially stressed is not a good place to be as an actor in terms of performing and meeting and getting that next job either. You can sense it.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, it's funny because certainly the general public, but even within our own community, people are sometimes fooled by the sort of images that the industry puts out to promote things, right? Where, we have series regulars, for example, who everyone thinks, oh, they're a series regular on a streaming show. They must be making a lot of money and they must be just doing great financially. And that's not necessarily the case, especially if they have, long hiatuses between seasons, and, maybe they're not on every episode, or maybe, various things can happen where what seems like you've grabbed that brass ring is actually not quite that, and yet everyone perceives that and thinks that. So
Right.
I think it is a real challenge that sometimes is swept under the rug that people don't really see. And
Right.
I think agents probably do see it because what's going on financially with those individuals. But in our last round of TV theatrical negotiations, this was a topic that came up with series regulars who were losing health insurance during the gaps
Yeah.
between the seasons of their streaming series, who were like, number one, number two on the call sheet and losing their health insurance. So
Which is terrible. And also we're in a business now where it's not a traditional, especially on a television show, as you know, right? Most shows aren't a traditional 22 episode order. We're talking about limited runs of 6-8 episodes. And then how do you expect people to make a living the rest of the time? Or if there's a year and a half in between seasons, what else are they doing? It's tough out there. It's as probably tough of a marketplace as I can remember for a while. And I think it kind of goes back to, then everyone has to be very transparent and open and honest about how they're feeling. What I have these conversations with clients, kind of what the marketplace is, and why perhaps a project that you might not have considered 5 years ago might be something that we need to have a conversation about now, just because it's competitive out there and people need to work.
Well, Daisy, this conversation is going so great. I think we're going to probably go so long we have to split this into 2 episodes. So why don't we take a quick pause for a moment here so we can do that. And then we're going to come back for our next episode and continue this conversation. The SAG-AFTRA podcast is produced and edited by Aaron Goddard and John Small. Supervising producers are Pamela Greenwald, Shira Reich, and Michael McNulty, with production and marketing support from Damon Romine, Jolie Cocante, Delaney Howard, Margot Giordano, Joe Mulgado, May Wong. The podcast is hosted by yours truly, Duncan Crabtree Ireland.